Tell me something. When Jesus died on that cross, what happened in the temple, in the holy place? What happened? The veil of the temple was ripped from top to bottom, indicating what? No more sacrifices, no more blood to be taken in there and sprinkled, you see. Because the true Lamb has come. Jesus has come now. And there will be no more animal sacrifice.
An unseen hand ripped the heavy veil from top to bottom. In today's Amazing Facts Crusade message, Speaker Joe Cruz explains the implications of that mysterious event. Stay tuned for the subject, the Great Judgment Day.
Let's come back here and notice something. After the angel Gabriel had explained to Daniel about the two beasts, being Medo-Persia and Greece, and then he went on to talk about the next king that would come up being very fierce, and we know who that was. That was the Roman Empire. And then we remember how that was divided up, and he goes into all of that. He even talks about the little horn. Now, we've spent several programs already talking about the little horn. We know exactly who that was. And we're not going to deal with the identity of that little horn power tonight. We know who it was. But Daniel goes on down and talks about the four kingdoms and then the little horn power. And then he comes to the end of his vision. And in this vision, he hears two saints talking to each other. He overhears what they're saying. And in verse 13, notice his words now. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And he woke up then, he came out of his vision. That was the last thing that he heard, was saying, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now, friends, Daniel was really puzzled about this, and he began to pray about it. And God answered his prayer and sent Gabriel down there to give him an explanation for it. And so Gabriel explained in verse 20 who the ram was. He explained who the he-goat was. And he went on to talk about the little horn and to tell who the little horn was by giving the marks of identification that we've already studied in our program here. But then he came to that last part of the vision, which had to do with the conversation between the two saints. And one of them said, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And when the angel Gabriel came to that part of the vision, friends, after explaining all the other previous symbols involved, notice what he said. I'm reading now verses 20, 26, and 27. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Now, he's talking about these 23 days, these 23 evenings and mornings, really. The last part of the vision in which he heard that word saying, Unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary be cleansed. The vision is true. Wherefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Gabriel said, Daniel, this is for a long time in the future. So close it up, seal it up. I'm not going to tell you this part of it because it's too far in the future. Forget it. Now, friends, let me tell you something. That's the part Daniel really wanted to know the most. You know why? Because to him, that seemed to indicate that his people would soon be going back to Jerusalem again. The services of the sanctuary would be restored, the temple would be rebuilt, and his people would be able to go in and worship God again and have the Day of Atonement and the cleansing of the sanctuary. You see, Daniel knew what the cleansing of the sanctuary was. And when they said unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed, to him that meant that Jerusalem would be built again. His people would be restored. And by the way, the 70 years prophecy of Jeremiah had almost been fulfilled by now. And he knew that it was almost time for the Jews to be released, to go back, and he was excited about this. Oh, I'll tell you, friends, Daniel was a very faithful, loyal Israelite. And he longed to have that temple restored. It was in ruins over in Jerusalem, and every Jew wished for that temple to be restored again. And so now Gabriel tells Daniel, Daniel, I'm not going to tell you about that cleansing of the sanctuary. I'm not going to tell you about that 2,300 days after which the sanctuary will be cleansed. Forget it. Shut it up. It's for a long time. You know how that affected Daniel, friends? Now, I'm not saying that he wasn't interested in Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome. I'm sure that was interesting for him to see that these great empires would be coming up one after another and ruling in the earth. But what he really wanted to know was, what's going to happen to my people? What's going to happen to that temple over there in ruins? I want to see it restored. And here's the way it affected him. He says, and I, Daniel, fainted. I'm reading verse 27. I, Daniel, fainted, and I was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Now, friends, he did understand the first part of the vision, didn't he? Because Gabriel spelled it out very clearly. The ram is Medo-Persia. The he-goat is Greece. He went right down telling him about the rest. It is only that last part, about that 2,300 days, that Gabriel didn't tell him. And that's the part that he didn't understand. He said, I was astonished and none understood it. But friends, Daniel did not give up. He started praying about it. In fact, in the next chapter, you find him praying earnestly for God to send Gabriel back and tell him the rest of that vision. He wanted to know about that cleansing of the sanctuary. And you have the whole prayer of Daniel recorded in that 9th chapter of Daniel. Notice he is praying in verse 4, and I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him and to them that keep his commandments, we have sinned and have committed iniquity. And you have that whole prayer of Daniel. And right in the middle of it, friends, notice what burst forth out of his troubled heart. Verse 17. Now therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. You see, he's still thinking about the sanctuary back in Jerusalem. And he said, Lord, have mercy. What about the temple over there? What about the sanctuary? It is desolate. Restore the sanctuary. O my God, incline thine ear and hear. Open thine eyes and behold our desolations and the city which is called by thy name. Daniel's heart is back there in Jerusalem, friends. And as soon as his prayer ended, listen in verse 20. And whiles I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, whiles I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. Friends, look at this thing for a moment. In answer to Daniel's earnest prayer, when he started sending it up before God, an order came out from God to Gabriel to come down there and answer his prayer. And by the time Daniel was finished praying, Gabriel was standing by his side. How fast can an angel travel, friends? How fast does God answer prayer? Well, I think we've got a good example of it here. Heaven's a pretty good distance away, but in that 5 minutes that you can read Daniel's word-for-word prayer here in the Bible, the angel Gabriel came from the side of God all the way down to Daniel and said, here I am, Daniel. God sent me down here now to tell you the rest of the vision and explain the rest of it to you. And he told him to put his mind on it. He said, understand the matter and consider the vision. So Daniel goes back now and remembers the rest of what he had seen in that dream or vision. The last part of it, the only part he had not understood, was that last part. And so Gabriel says, Daniel, I've come to tell you now the part you didn't understand before, the part I didn't explain before, so put your mind on it. So Daniel then begins to think about it, and he remembers that conversation of the two saints, where one of them said, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now, we're going to begin reading Gabriel's explanation to Daniel of what that 2,300 days really meant. Now, before we begin putting this in front of us on the board, let's remember one thing, that in symbolic Bible prophecy, a day always stands for what? A year. That is exactly right. You remember Ezekiel 4:6? God says, I've appointed thee each day for a year. So here we are now in the symbolic portions of prophecy in Daniel, meaning then that any day referred to here has to be a year. So really then, we're talking about 2,300 years. 2,300 years. So we're going to put right here in front of you 2,300 years. Now this is the longest time prophecy ever mentioned in the Bible, folks. And that's why it is of particular interest to us here in this meeting. Let's go on, beginning now with verse 24. Daniel's breaking it into parts so Daniel can understand it. He says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Now notice something. Every one of these things has to do with the Messiah, doesn't it? Talking about the Holy One coming, the Messiah coming. And he says 70 weeks are determined. Now that word determined in the Hebrew language, friends, means cut off, is cut off. 70 weeks are cut off. What do you think it's cut off from? Well, he just told him that he was talking about the rest of the vision. Isn't that right? And the rest of the vision involved what? The 2,300 days or years. And so now he's saying 70 weeks of this is cut off and assigned to you, Daniel, and your people to see what they're going to do about the Messiah. To finish filling up your cup of iniquity by seeing what you're going to do about accepting the Messiah or rejecting the Messiah. And then he goes on. We've cut off now 70 weeks. 70 weeks. By the way, how many days is in 70 weeks? 7 times 70 is what? 490. We're going to do a little arithmetic here tonight now. So this is 490 days. And a day for a year is 490 years. So remember this now. 490 years is cut off of the 2,300 years and is assigned to the Jewish people, the Hebrew nation, to see what they'll do with the Messiah when he comes. And this will be a period of probation for them as the nation of Israel. But now we don't know when this period begins or ends, do we? We just got it out here in space. We don't know a point to begin counting. We don't know just exactly when it is ending. So let's go to the next verse and see if we can start pinning it down and be a little bit more definite. Verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now we've got a beginning point, friends. It says from a certain point you begin counting. And it says that point is the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. Well, now, friends, can we find out when the order went out and the commandment went out for the Jews to return to Jerusalem at the end of the captivity? Can we find that in the Bible? We certainly can. In fact, it is found here in the book of Ezra. In the book of Ezra, chapter 7, we have the actual words of that decree that was sent out, allowing the Jews to return, in fact, commanding them to return. We begin reading in verse 11 now of Ezra chapter 7. Now this is the copy of the letter that the king of Artaxerxes gave unto Ezra the priest, the scribe, even a scribe of the words of the commandments of the Lord and of his statutes to Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, unto Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace, and at such a time. I make a decree that all they of the people of Israel and of his priests and Levites in my realm, which are minded of their own free will to go up to Jerusalem, go with thee. And he goes right on down, giving the actual words of this order by King Artaxerxes that the Jews should go back and build their temple again. Now, if you want to know the date for this, friends, look right in the margin of your Bible. If you've got a Bible with marginal notes, references, you'll find at the top of the page BC 457. Now, this is one of the firmest dates that's ever been established. They have checked this out with astronomy, with eclipses, and with the ancient tablets, and have found that it is absolutely accurate. That decree of Artaxerxes went forth in the year 457 BC. So that is the beginning point then of this 2,300 years, and of course the beginning point also of the 70 weeks are 490 years. Now the 490 years is a period of what? It's cut off for what purpose? For the Jews, to see what they'll do with the Messiah. Well, now what does it say? It says, from the going forth of this commandment unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now let's put that up here, friends. From the date of 457, it says that you'll have 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And that is how many weeks? Can you add it up? 3 score is how much? 60. 3 score is 60. And then 7 weeks would make 67. And then 2 weeks would make 69. All right. From the going forth of the commandment to restore Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince will be 69 weeks. How many days in 69 weeks? How many days in 69 weeks? It's 1 week less than the 70 weeks. And the 70 weeks was 490, wasn't it? So this would make 483, wouldn't it, if you subtract 7 from it? 483 days, and a day for a year is 483 years. So from 457 BC, the going forth of that commandment, 483 years will bring you, it says, to Messiah the Prince. Now, friends, the word Messiah means anointed. It means anointed. Jesus was the anointed one. And when was he anointed, friends? When was Jesus anointed? At his baptism. You remember the Holy Ghost came down upon him and anointed him, and from there he went out to begin his ministry because he became at that point the Messiah, the anointed one. And that, my friends, happened in the year 27 A.D. 27 A.D., and that is exactly 483 years from the going forth of that commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. I want you to see how very accurate the Bible is, and these prophecies are, friends, in preparing the way for the advent of the Messiah when he would come. The Bible actually spells out the very time he would appear as the anointed one, the time he'd come walking up out of the waters of that Jordan, and the Spirit of God would descend upon him there and to fit him for his mighty ministry. And so we have then that 483 years, bringing us up to the date of 27 A.D. when Christ was anointed as the Messiah. Now we have 1 week left in there, the 70th week of Daniel. Have you ever heard about the 70th week of Daniel, friends? Here it is now. Right at the end of the 70 weeks, we've got 1 week left. We've accounted for 69 weeks. That has come to the Messiah now appearing, the baptism of Jesus. What is going to happen now during this 70th week? Let's read on here and find out, friends. Notice verse 26. It says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Now Messiah is going to die. He's going to be cut off. He's going to be sacrificed. He's the lamb that's going to be sacrificed. But it says that he won't be for himself. And then it says in verse 27, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now that's your 70th week that still remains there for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. My friends, exactly in the middle of that 7-year period, because a day for a year makes that 70th week to be what? 7 years instead of 7 days. In the middle of that week, it said, Messiah would be cut off and he would cause the sacrifices to cease. Tell me something. When Jesus died on that cross, what happened in the temple, in the holy place? What happened? The veil of the temple was ripped from top to bottom, indicating what? No more sacrifices, no more blood to be taken in there and sprinkled, you see. Because the true Lamb has come, Jesus has come now. And there will be no more animal sacrifice. And so an angel hand, or the hand of God, ripped that heavy veil of the temple from top to bottom, exposing the place where the blood used to be sprinkled. No more needs to be sprinkled. Jesus has come now. Jesus has died. The true Lamb has fulfilled the type and the shadow. And so according to the prophecy, then he would indeed be cut off in the middle of the week and cause the sacrifice to cease. How long did Jesus minister after his baptism before he died? How long was it? 3.5 years. Remember? 3.5 years. And isn't that in the middle of the 70th week? 3.5? 3.5 brings you to the year 31 A.D., friends. 31 A.D. We'll have that put on the board now to represent the middle of that week when Jesus died, when he was cut off for your sins and mine. Now that leaves another 3.5 years, doesn't it? To the end of the 70 weeks. What was going to happen at the end of the 70 weeks? Well, that was for the Jews, you see, to find out what they'd do with the Messiah. Well, friends, what did they do with the Messiah when he came? Did the Jewish nation accept him? Did they receive him? No, no. They rejected him. And what did God then do concerning the Jewish nation? Jesus said, you remember, your house is left unto you desolate. And Paul said, seeing that you put the truth from you, lo, we turn to the Gentiles. And my friends, that was the beginning of the gospel going to the Gentiles. And that was in the year 34 A.D. Exactly 70 weeks or 490 years from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. In other words, 3.5 years from the death of Jesus brings us to the time when the message was to go to the Gentiles. And Paul, you remember Saul was standing by there as Stephen was being stoned. And then from that point, Saul went out there to become the apostle to the Gentiles. And 34 A.D., that was the time that the Jewish nation's probation ended and the gospel began to go to the Gentiles. Isn't that a fantastic prophecy, friends? Don't you see here that God had actually given the message to the world as to when the Savior would come? There was no need for men to be unaware of that star in Bethlehem, over Bethlehem that night. God had told the very year that they should expect the Messiah to appear. And if those Jewish people had been studying the prophecies, they could have known that that year of 27 A.D., the Messiah of the world would be anointed for his work. And they would also have known about the end of their own probation, which took place in the year 34 A.D. But now, friends, let's go down to the end of this long 2,300-year time prophecy. This is the longest prophecy in the Bible, and we've still got 1,810 years left. We've only come 490 years, and so we've got another 1,810 before we're brought to the end of the 2,300 years. And it brings us, friends, to the year 1844. Now you can see how this is indeed the longest time prophecy in the Bible, reaching from 457 B.C. right down to 1844. Now you may say, well, Brother Joe, how do we know that that period would end in 1844? Listen, we pinned it down at 4 different points, haven't we? We got the date of the going forth of that commandment to restore Jerusalem, and that is an absolutely certain date. We got the date of the baptism of Jesus. This is unchallenged, 27 A.D. Then we got the date of the crucifixion, 3.5 years later in the middle of that week. We got the time that the gospel began to go to the Gentiles in 34 A.D. All of those dates check out perfectly. And so we know that the ending date is also correct. 1844 A.D. has to be the correct date. Well, now, friends, with this little background, I want to ask a question. What took place in 1844 to cleanse the sanctuary? You remember what the cleansing was? The cleansing of the sanctuary was what? The Day of Atonement. The Day of Judgment. See? That's when the high priest went through that heavy veil and went back there to sprinkle the blood on that mercy seat. Well, now, friends, did that take place in 1844? Did the high priest go in there to do that work in the temple at Jerusalem? Bless your heart, there was no temple in Jerusalem in 1844, was there? In fact, the temple was destroyed in the year 70 A.D. That was the last of the temple. No more temple. And so it was impossible that in 1844 this could represent that tabernacle or that temple that was here on this earth. Impossible. Because it was destroyed for the last time in 70 A.D. And yet the prophecy is very clear that Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Well, if it wasn't the sanctuary here on earth, if it wasn't the sanctuary there that existed behind the veil of the temple in Jerusalem, then what other temple or sanctuary was there, friends, that could be cleansed? Tell me, was there another sanctuary? Yes, the one in heaven. The one that Moses copied. The one he saw on top of that mountain. The one that was to be the pattern for making the earthly sanctuary.
You have been watching the second of a three-part series on the longest time prophecy in the Bible. It stretches over a period of more than 2,000 years, and according to the explanation given to Daniel in his vision, you and I now live in the time of the Great Judgment Day. Friends, this is not only a fascinating prophecy, it's vitally important for every Christian to understand. Why don't you write for a copy of Joe's message for the entire three-part series? I'll give the address in a moment, but first, here are the messengers with the song, Watch, Ye Saints.
Watch, ye saints, with eyelids waking, lo, the powers of heaven are shaking. Keep your lamps all trimmed and burning, ready for your Lord's returning. Oh, he comes, yes, Jesus comes. Lo, he comes. He comes all glorious. Jesus comes to reign victorious. Lo, he comes. Yes, Jesus comes. Sinners come while Christ is pleading now for you. He's interceding. Haste their grace in time diminished shall proclaim the mysteries finished. Lo, he comes. Lo, Jesus comes. Lo, he comes. He comes all